I come from a time where I started finding my voice and words for matrices of development, of process, of transformation, of somatic recovery and spiritual development. And I want to share a few of those freshly found terms of my inner world, because I think the moment that we have language is also the first moment where we can truly tap into the space beyond words and beyond language. As long as something is not describable, we somehow didn't go through the phase of words in order to point precisely enough to the thing beyond. So even though I'm talking about like mystical aspects or paradoxical spiritual aspects, it still might make sense to offer language in order to open a door to a time up from tomorrow on that enables us to fall into a more embodied silence around those things, instead of confusing silence with being shut down or terrorized by taboos. So this is me talking about a differentiation that might make sense when we talk about healing and liberation. I come from talking about trauma therapy and also this whole great research that's happening at the moment around how does a nervous system recover from trauma and shock and woundings inside. And the whole therapeutic and healing scene seems to focus on, I have been let down as a little child. I haven't been loved unconditionally. I did not receive the amount of appreciation and support that I would have deserved as a little baby and little girl or little boy. So what we later want to experience in order to heal from that is moments and maybe even forever lasting relationships with our soul partner, of unconditional love, of full support, and of deepest appreciation of our existence. And yes, this works. And if we receive this amount of love over and over again, if we experience that people take us serious, that they truly listen to our words, and that they do not let us down when we cry or need help, etc. This is incredibly healing, and it's an experience of heaven on earth that I want all of us to have all the time. Practically speaking, it will become more and more a privilege to those people who can afford those settings, those therapists, those seminars, and those methods. The more of us that are busy with just making ends meet, the less we can talk about this being a sustainable solution on a global scale. So this is why I want to talk about the path of healing, what I defined a minute ago, as a kind of opposite to the path of freedom. And this path of freedom is not about bypassing the shitty stuff, but focusing on the same shitty stuff and taking super serious what you learn from there. Because in my research with somatic mysticism and trauma and mysticism, I tap more and more into the experience that we are not only off the moment we are traumatized, we are also more on than ever before and ever after the moment we get traumatized. Which doesn't mean that trauma is a good thing. It's hell on earth. Definitely hell on earth. It's a full death experience. However, it provides the even more an incredible amount of insight and wisdom for our post-traumatic growth. So let me show this with an example of, I have been born and I have been let down around my inner essence, inner radiance, inner aliveness, and inner truth by my parents and everybody around. Not because my parents wanted to harm me, quite the opposite. They love me to death, and they are awesome. And they didn't have the same amount of appreciation in their childhood. And my grandparents didn't receive this amount of support in their childhood, and so on, and so on, and so on. So that's the whole story. Innocent children just doing their best, just like you and just like me. And still, there is this moment where later on in my life, when I try to stay on the path of healing, I again and again get so angry and full of hatred by I have been let down. And then I can get desperate when my organization around therapeutic moments of no, there is full support, no, you are not too much, no, you are perfect, no matter what, when those moments do not hack my system of defensive mechanisms deeply enough, when I can get desperate and try harder and harder to heal. So how about that? Saying, I have no support on earth. I have to do it all alone. It makes me angry, it makes me disappointed. And so, fully yes, I will do it all alone. And this is the opposite of toughen up. It's the opposite of an armor. It's allowing your heart to break. It's allowing yourself the full amount of feeling without collapsing into one moment of suffering. It's incredibly challenging. I do know what I'm talking about. And still there is a path of freedom and liberation that comes from us referring to the same traumatic belief system and using it with full speed in order to somehow be born into back to paradise or back into paradise just the other way around. And it is like constantly being broken open by life on the path of crisis and disappointment and unwelcome challenge. The moment it feels good is the moment that I think it gets too cozy. And that's not like you have to decide bravely, the warrior that you truly are, to the path of freedom instead of healing. Quite the opposite. As long as you can heal, just heal. Because this is so much more the path that we are wired for. Healing in a safe space with our beloved ones around who support us in our unwinding and our shaking and our crying and our healing and recovering. However, the less this is something that can be provided to all of us, because more and more of us, even or also in the future in a global scale, we have to face so much friction. We have to stand for our love for life with such an amount of resistance around and war and suffering around. Not because somebody wants that, not because we are surrounded by bad ones, but just because we are in an incredibly charged time on a global scale. So I really want to promote the path of freedom as the path of systematic anti-fragility, being fed by our trauma impact. And this is not a video with a call to action, quite the opposite. If you are traumatized, try to get as much help and as much support as possible. And I'm the wrong one in those days to refer to in these questions, but there are great resources out there, and they are also available through the internet. And I would combine every possible healing method at the same time, just in order to feel as supported as I possibly can. And still, if there is no other way, let's fully go into, okay, I won't hand this life, this awesome life, over to these moments in my childhood or in my past. Like then, if there is no path of healing visible for us, Let's stand up for finding a path through the invisibility. And that is something that I want to call the path of freedom. It's breaking from what broke us, and by that stepping into an invincibility inside that will never, never, never be broken. I feel the more I talk about this that I have to talk so much more about it. Still, this is a video full of disclaimers because I'm talking about trauma, and trauma is storage of hell inside of me in many layers, inside of you in many layers. And I will never allow trauma, or to be talked about trauma in a way that just bypasses this truly, truly bloody stuff. But if I can do this video, and if you can listen to this video, still there is this invincibility alive, and I want us to take pride in the story of own survival, that by being the story of our own survival is always so much more than just survival.